This is the Podcast Digest. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. It's episode 14 of the Podcast Digest. This is going to be a special edition, a little bit different than what I've done before here on the show. Hopefully you guys will like it, and I will want you to let me know if you like this sort of break from the format, if you think it's something you want to hear more of. But really, I'm using the holiday here in the U.S., Thanksgiving, of course. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you who celebrate, as an opportunity to have my first guest here on the Podcast Digest. This is my brother, Chris Lizette, who is in town from Virginia for the holiday weekend, and I have basically bribed him into sitting in co-chair on the very special episode 14 of the Podcast Digest. We're going to talk about a few different subjects here, as I mentioned, breaking from normal format, but hopefully something that my listeners will enjoy and that they will find of value as well. We're recording here on Friday, Black Friday, and hopefully this episode should be out on the same day. So we thought that the first thing we could talk about a little bit was sort of the insanity and the craziness of the Black Friday shopping season. A lot of deals. If your email's been blowing up like ours has, you know that there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. Maybe you were one of those absolute insane people who hit the lines and camped out this morning at Best Buy or Walmart or H.H. Gregg or what have you. Not us. There was some sleeping in involved and some coffee. But anyways, let me bring in my guest here, Chris. How's it going, Chris?
Oh, so far so good, Dan. Thank you. And first off, for all of those out there in Cyberland, Dan's bribery is totally amazing. I truly recommend it. If he ever bribes you, you're on the winning side of things.
Which was basically the ice for your drinks as well as my wife's cooking, right? That was pretty much a bribery?
Well, except for the fact that you forced me to carry the 44 pounds of ice myself, Dan.
Well, there was that. Yeah, we did kill our ice machine yesterday with the big family meal and had to do some replenishment there.
That's all right. Your wife's cooking absolutely made up for it.
I can imagine it was worth it. I know that there was sleep-induced comas that happened yesterday for the Thanksgiving holiday.
And which will ensue later on this afternoon.
Indeed. Leftovers, always a highlight of the season. So let's talk about today. Today is Black Friday with the shopping, and although we didn't go out to any stores, I know that we definitely launched the websites of a few choice stores and on our tablets and found some things. And those the fan of listening, which I imagine you are if you've joined us here on the show, you did something today on a Black Friday sale that some of our listeners who enjoy high-quality audio might appreciate. What'd you get today, Chris?
Absolutely, and it's actually kind of odd that you mentioned that. I had been planning on this purchase for at least 5 months. I just purchased through Best Buy's on-site online website there the new Klipsch Series 5 quintet system, which I don't know if you audiophiles out there or not are familiar with this. However, Klipsch's Quintet 5 happens to be one of the most amazing sounding, highest definition audio that they can produce sub $1,000. It has done nothing but great things for me in the past. I've actually owned the version 2, which I have in my bedroom, which is totally fantastic. But I wanted to bring it to level number 2. I wanted to get it out where all my friends are, hanging outside in the living room. And not only does this play music well, which, I happen to be a huge music fan, but secondarily, it's amazing for movies. It's amazing for, yes, audiobooks and for podcasts as well. So there's a little quick shout out there for Dan. But honestly, it was a fantastic price. Yeah, Klipsch doesn't generally throw things on discounts. Most of the time, it happens to be a only Black Friday scenario. So again, I've been anticipating this for a good long time. So I went ahead and went to the Best Buy website, which actually was one of the best, if not the cheapest prices I found. And I did pick it up for there. I believe generally it's $549.99. I think is generally how that rolls. And thankfully, Best Buy had a $274.99 deal today, almost 50% off. So it was a fantastic deal, and it wasn't only because Black Friday. They don't ever put things on sale. Klipsch is very, very adamant. It's only manufacturer rebates, so it was a great deal. So all of you out there that happen to enjoy high end but don't want to pay a house's mortgage for it, this is by far the best option that you guys can find.
And depending on when you're hearing this show, that deal may or may not be available. Obviously, actually, it's open for today. It was online, not something that he or I had to take a trip down to the absolute crazy Best Buy to pick up. He was able to order it online and do a store pickup, and he gets about a week to do that as well. So when he makes it back home tomorrow, he will be able to pick that up in the local Best Buy in Virginia. So that worked out well. And we saw it on a couple other stores as well, but they didn't have the ease of the store pickup or anything of that nature. And so this is what you would recommend in terms of home theater. That not something I have a ton of expertise, but if any of the listeners out there are some home theater gurus and they wanted to kind of, like you mentioned, upgrade their system, is this what you would say would be the way to go?
Absolutely. The Klipsch's claim to fame is generally with the materials they use to create the housing for these. It's absolutely natural. It's totally warm and reproduces everything from vocals to highs and lows, almost as if you were listening to them inside of a studio almost. It is really, really high end at an amazing price for the quality.
And just so everyone knows, and I'm going to try to get the link in the show notes now. Maybe I'll put the product link in the show notes because I don't know if the sale will be live at the time you're listening to it. But if you're not sure what we're saying here, because it is kind of an odd name, that's Klipsch. That's Klipsch, correct?
Correct.
Yes, so that is one to check out if you guys are interested in a great audio setup for your living room. Obviously, Chris thought it was good enough to go ahead and whip the credit card out today on Black Friday. There are a ton of Black Friday sales out there. There are all kinds of things on sale. Just about any manufacturer of a product that you like probably has a deal going on today and maybe through the weekend. I know that there were pre-Black Friday sales and then pre-Black Friday sales. To me, it's getting kind of crazy. I mean, you've got stores opening now on Thanksgiving, some as early as 4 p.m. I was in Best Buy earlier this week talking to one of the folks helping me with a store pickup on another Christmas gift, and they had kind of just shook their heads when I told them I saw the guy out there setting up the railings for the crowds for this morning. But on that subject, I know that a lot of talk has been happening. There's been, change.org petitions put out, asking Target and Walmart and these other stores to not open up on Thanksgiving so that the staff could be there with their families. Before we leave the Black Friday subject, Chris, what do you think about that? What do you think about we've both had friends in retail. We used to work retail ourselves back in our younger days. What are your thoughts with these stores kind of backing their sales up to Thursday as well as the pre-Black Friday online sales and the pre-Black Friday? I know Walmart and Best Buy started releasing their prices a week early. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, as you can imagine, with the advent of the internet and as prolific as the internet is, it kind of has taken some of that really, really fun mysticism from Black Friday away from the masses. But I do have to make a very quick comment about actually working on Thanksgiving Day in retail. Now, there's a lot of things that I've seen on the internet, even on Facebook, where it's don't go to the store because they work their people and they don't do this and they don't do that. But I'll have to say an addendum to that. If you're going to be working on a holiday, you should be paid properly for it. If you're going to work on Thanksgiving or you're going to work on a Christmas or however, you should be paid a decent amount of money for taking that time away from you and your family, which is the reason for the season, so to say. However, I don't have a problem with them being open on the holidays. I have a problem with stores that simply won't pay their people holiday pay for doing so. Such as Food Lion, which is a huge company down south where it's a grocery store. It also sells wine, things of that kind. They will put their folks on staff on the Thursday for Thanksgiving, but won't give them any extra pay. It's not like a time and a half. It's not double time. It's nothing. It is your hourly wage, and it's just part of your schedule, which I think is unfortunate, and thus I will not be shopping at Food Lion because that, I believe, is a travesty in general for all those of us that will shop on the Friday, those of us that earn the proper wages. That's just me.
And, maybe you out there right now listening are one of these folks that work in retail. Maybe you had to work today or work the day that you're hearing this, because right now for the next month or so, there will be true insanity going on in all of these stores. And, you and I I've mentioned to the listeners before that I do come from a mobile DJ background, and you also have been a mobile DJ in the past. And I've said a lot, that people in the entertainment industry, or in the case of the holiday shopping season, the retail industry, I think it's often a very forgotten subset of folks, because if you go out on the night before Thanksgiving because you forgot something, or better example, you referenced earlier, we had to run to a gas station to pick up ice, and there were 3 or 4 people at the store working on Thanksgiving. And in where we come from, so to speak, in the mobile DJ world, I know I've worked Christmas Eves, I've worked New Year's Eves, I've worked, other holidays when you are helping to provide either a service or entertainment for people who've, attend or come to the store in retail case. Meanwhile, you're not getting to enjoy, you're not getting to participate. And so I think it's a good point that definitely the employees should be rewarded, they should be compensated. But also, I think beyond that, if you are, having to run into a store on Thanksgiving or Christmas Day, or if you are if you decide to go to a bar Christmas night, let's say, keep in mind that these people are, being pulled from their families. And to your point, a lot of these places probably aren't compensating them with, a change in their hourly rate or anything of that nature. So it's not the day to be mistreating employees and being a complete fool. And of course, Black Friday, especially the AM shopping, I think is personified by people being fools.
I totally agree. And that's actually a great point you mentioned about the service, those that are doing the service, those that are actively out there delivering the service. There is a lot of times when those of us that are the consumers always have that, well, the consumer's always right scenario, which honestly, a vast majority of businesses will buy into. However, those of us as the consumer, I believe, honestly, it's a moral, ethical scenario where we do need to treat these folks a little bit kinder, a little bit bigger tip, or even just a happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of times you don't get that. I can tell you right now, I'll tell you some super secret Dan Lizette business. Here we go. I actually was the DJ for a New Year's Eve event that Dan and his wife's very, very first date was at. So I will tell you that Dan was totally, totally kind to me. He gave me no tip, however, so I will tell you right now that he is part and parcel with this huge mob of masses that doesn't appreciate the service industry. But yes, I was absolutely in service. I was in service on holidays. And I can tell you right now, sometimes all we really want is just a, hey man, great job, here's $5 for your time, so on and so forth. And I don't think a lot of stores, especially in retail these days, actually accommodates their staff well enough during these times when they force them to be on the floor. And
it's probably something we all need to keep in mind, because we're all going to be going to those holiday parties. We're all going to be doing our shopping. Most of us, or a lot of us, I should say, I don't know if that's most, a lot of us have moved that shopping to online where this becomes less of an issue. At least in what we have to deal with face-to-face, so to speak. But, there's all kinds of stories out there about how Amazon treats their employees, or even the online processes. Some of these warehouses, the picking and the packing and when they're working and what type of hours they're being forced to work this time of year. Something to keep in mind because, there's always somebody out there kind of having to endure more or go through worse, if you will. And I think that's part of the season, keeping those type of things in mind. Before we leave the deal conversation on the Black Friday thing, though, I did want to throw out one more thing. Chris had mentioned the great deal on the Klipsch Quintet 5 home theater system. But, one thing to keep in mind is something I like to do. As we all know, it's not only time for the gift giving season, but there's so many deals out there. There's definitely ample opportunity to watch for your own purchases, if you will. I am a huge iTunes user. iTunes, be it apps or games or movies. Recently bought Guardians of the Galaxy last weekend so that we could do the family sharing on all of our devices at home. And that was a $20 purchase. So if you're like me, where you definitely pump a lot of money into the iTunes ecosystem, iTunes gift cards are on sale almost all the time right now. I know PayPal Digital Gifts has a huge one today, one of the biggest I've ever seen, a $100 gift card for $75. So if you are an iTunes purchaser, now is a great time, be it as a gift or even for yourself. $100 gift card for $75 is like giving $25 for free. I spend that kind of money over the course of time, of course, not, every day, but over the course of time, that $100 would get spent, and why not, only spend $75 to do that. So that's just another Black Friday shopping tip from the Podcast Digest, if you will. But we want to talk about one more thing here on this special episode, and that is, we obviously talk about things on the Podcast Digest that you can spend listening to. Obviously, my focus all along has been podcasts. Taking a little break from that this week. I will be back next week with 2 more show recommendations for you. But as I mentioned, I want to use this as a little bit different opportunity. But for those of you who do love to listen, there is another audio format that I know I've spent a lot of time listening to as well, in addition to podcasts, and that is audiobooks. And we all know that Audible, an Amazon company, is the big behemoth in the audiobook world. And when I was talking with Chris about what we could talk about today, he is an audiobook listener. So I wanted to get a couple of recommendations from him on things that he's enjoyed over the years in terms of audiobooks and provide a little bit variety in our audio recommendations here. So what have you been listening to on Audible lately, Chris?
Well, Dan, honestly, I listen to pretty much everything you can imagine as I drive around. My career takes me to left and right and always on the road, driving behind the wheel, tons of windshield time. So I am honestly the guy that can tell you all about an audiobook. I listen to every audiobook you can imagine. I've listened to everything from, the Game of Thrones for ages and ages, World of Fire, et cetera, et cetera. I have listened to Sports Capture. I have listened to every imaginable Lord of the Rings, every imaginable sportscast that you can possibly get inside of Audible. But for what I've just done recently is I kind of dove back into some of the books that I read back in college, and there was one very specific one, a series by Frank Herbert called Dune, actually. It's an extremely old book. It actually has its own ecology of amazingness, and I've done nothing but dive right in. So Dune audiobook in Audible was actually released back in April of 2007. And if you are an Audible user, generally it's approximately 1 credit, or if you want to just flat out throw some cash at it, it's about $48, $49, something in that rope. But I absolutely recommend it. This particular audiobook, it may seem a little bit pricey, I understand, but it actually uses multiple narrators. It uses voice acting. It uses perfect accents. Some of the characters inside of the book actually have very specific accents, and they have actors and actresses that can reenact that live. It is totally an experience. If anybody has not actually dove into the audiobook world, the Dune, original Dune, is one of the greatest to start with because it is literally verbatim from Frank Herbert's script, all the way 21 hours worth of an audiobook. It starts from A, goes all the way to Z, including the appendices. It is truly an iteration that everybody should appreciate. But that wasn't good enough for me. What can I say? I drive a lot. So I kind of got hooked into that. I really, really, really loved the story. The ecology of the story was great. The culture was great. So I thought, hey, how about I see what number 2 is like? So I want to step above what most folks do. I went and I looked into the second book in the Dune series called Dune Messiah, which was also released in 2007, this time in October. This one's a little bit cheaper. This one is only $21. Again, probably a single credit for the Audible folks. And I have to say, this was great. This was a good version. Unfortunately, it did not give me the same reflection, the same environment that I got from the first book. This one, unfortunately, is only about 9 hours long, which I personally believe, and I have not tested this, but I will go back into the actual books. But I think that they kind of chopped out a couple of things here and there. I believe that there might have been some appendices missing. The actual page-by-page Dune Messiah should have been about 15 to 16 hours. This one is about 9 hours. The story seemed full. I don't remember missing anything, so I could just be off my rocker, which is quite possible. But there's a much shorter version, and the Dune Messiah narrators are nowhere near as dynamic as the ones that I read inside of the Dune original. I felt that the readers in Dune were active, they were energetic, but unfortunately, when I moved to the Dune Messiah, the second book in the series, it kind of felt like it was just going the ropes. It felt like they were just moving forward, reading this, not using accents. They had less number of narrators, and it was difficult at times to even discern that they changed narrators. It was definitely not the same experience that I had with the first one, which kind of let me down. But either direction, high-quality story, truly great sci-fi fantasy, in case any of you guys are into that kind of stuff. Absolutely amazing story, not to mention the morals and ethics that relate to the story are absolutely astounding. Definite recommendation.
And I'll tell you what, you touched on one thing there that I think is interesting here, especially if you're not an audiobook listener. Maybe you are a podcast listener, because this is something sort of in our world as well that's been talked about, and that is the length. I've had a lot of conversations on Twitter, and if you're not following the Podcast Digest at Pod Digest, please do. I try to get involved with a lot of different listeners and other show hosts. One hot topic, if you will, has been show length. How long should the show be? Is it too long? Is it too short? Here on the Podcast Digest, I tend to keep things between 15 and 20 minutes. We're blowing past that a little bit for this special episode. But a lot of other hosts will ask me, how long do you think something should be? And I've always said that I don't think length is that important as long as the content is good. If people like what they're hearing, they will continue to listen. And I know I've previously been an Audible member. I know that when I've looked at book lengths, I tend to want to get a lot of bang for my buck. So I've listened to a lot of Stephen King books and so on and so forth, and there is a lot of, longer stories. And I love it when I see 25, 28, 32 hours. It makes me think that I'm getting a lot for my money, so to speak. So let me ask you this. When you mentioned that, when the original Dune went 21 plus, when the second one wasn't coming in even at 9, did you feel, because, they're both one credit, did you feel like it was kind of a little bit of a shortchanging?
I did, actually, and that's kind of one of the more important parts about this audiobook scenario. I believe that they put enough effort into it to make it great, but they didn't do the theatrical, there was the backgrounds, none of the environmental factors that the first book had. They literally stripped right off the second one. So I don't think that the length was so much the issue, but I think that the quality, the feeling of, wow, I'm inside this book. Wow, this story belongs to me. I didn't get that with the second one.
And that can happen too. I think that happens a lot with, abridged versions, when they try to take liberties with the story. And, and some of you out there, when I talk about some of these podcasts, I've recommended everything from, 10 to 15 minute shows up to shows that regularly run 2 to 3 hours. Keep that in mind. I mentioned in one of my pro tip sections from a few weeks back that, don't let length turn you off. I do not have anyone to see a 3-hour runtime on a podcast and be like, there's no way I'm listening to that. When you kind of compare the podcast world up to the audiobook world, it's clear that there is, a lot of discrepancy in terms of what lengths people look at. Now, one might say, a book tends to have a story and a plot line, and it's driven and continual. I would argue that the best podcasts out there have a very similar effect in terms of you wanting to see what's next, and you're wanting to continue to listen to these hosts because you enjoy the content, you enjoy what the hosts are talking about. So just another element, I think, to take into that ongoing conversation I seem to be having with other hosts on Twitter or, on some of my features here on the Podcast Digest regarding show length. So, well, those are great recommendations, Chris, for our audio fans. I think if you are an audio fan, that's why you're here. So if you do want to jump over to the Audible world for audiobooks, there are a couple good recommendations from Chris as well. Well, I think that, as I mentioned, we've gone the longest. This will be the longest episode of the Podcast Digest so far, and that's okay. As I said, I'm not concerned with length at this point. I want you guys to kind of give me some feedback. Comment on the post on the website, thepodcastdigest.info. As I mentioned, follow me on Twitter at PodDigest. Let me know. Do you want to hear more interviews? Do you want to hear more conversations in person, either or with other hosts of shows? That is something I'm looking into the future, to bring some other guests onto the Podcast Digest to kind of make the conversation a little bit more than just me telling you my thoughts, but getting some other input as well. If you want go longer form and let me know your thoughts, you could do that via email. thepodcastdigest@gmail.com is how to do that. In the meantime, I hope that you enjoyed episode 14, this special conversation with Chris Lizette. My name's Dan Lizette for the Podcast Digest. Thank you very much for listening. All ratings and reviews are greatly appreciated. And I hope you guys had a great holiday, and I will see you back with 2 new show recommendations next week on the Podcast Digest.